Hello everyone, this is General Zorkobi and thank you so much for joining me here today where we take a look at a new battle between these two great ships. Last time, the Munificent class had engaged the Venator, however now we found it a different opponent. Now of course, as always, don't forget to like, share, subscribe and click that bell button to become part of the Du Zerka Legion to never miss out a new upload. Now enjoy and may the Force be with you. The Munificent class frigate, also referred to as the Banking Clan frigate, was first really sighted around the time of the Clone Wars. However, since the Banking Clan was a great supporter of the CIS, there was a good reason to suggest that the frigate was used before the Clone Wars to haul cargo and transport important personnel and more. It was, however, not seen around as much during the Galactic Civil War, although the Rebel Alliance did have a few. It was, however, seen a bit after the Empire had fallen at Endor, and saw a great resurgence under the command of the Pentastar alignment. The Dreadnaught class heavy cruiser formed the backbone of the Galactic Republic judicial forces and was seen up to around 80 years before the Clone Wars. These ships were the main protectors of the Republic almost all the way up to the Clone Wars and fought in many battles during the Clone Wars. It was, however, not until after the Clone Wars that the Dreadnoughts really began shining in the Imperial fleet as well as the Rebel Alliance and New Republic. They were seen in many battles and served for probably over 200 years, if we take into account the Legacy era. And now let's take a look at the general things and aspects. The Munificent class was used as the backbone of the Confederacy of Independent Systems during the Clone Wars. It was a ship best used en masse because of its weird hull-shaped design, but likewise because a lot of them could be created in a very short time and to a very streamlined design type. The price was set around 57 million credits per ship. That meant that it was not cheap to produce, but it was cheap to operate. It was 825 meters long, slightly over half a mile, and so it should actually be categorized under the typical heavy cruiser line of ships that went from 600 to 1000 meters in length, before the next line of ships on the scale called destroyers. Frigates were actually in the 200 to 400 meter range scale. However, this was according to the Anaxes War College system, a basic system that rated ships based on their length only, but this was not a definite scale, it was just typical. And of course there were variations. So, take it as you will, but it was mostly rough estimations. Now, apart from the 825 meters in length, it also had 426 meters in width and 243 meters in height and depth. That meant that the ship was actually fairly big, just over half as wide as it was long, and then again just over half as tall as it was wide. So, this by all means was no small ship. It served roles as supporting ships and their firepower was pretty nasty, however, more of that in a later section. It also served as a cargo hauler for the Banking Clan and was in general a pretty well-rounded ship. It had a variety of roles, which can be both good and bad, but something that's definitely a pro for this CIS frigate was that it was almost a droid brain in itself, requiring a crew of only 200 personnel to fly the ship, and that crew consisted mostly of droids as well as a few meatbags far and in between. So, this ship was extremely cost efficient. Added to that, a standard frigate carried 150,000 deactivated droids in its belly, as well as 40,000 tons of cargo and 2 years worth of consumables. The Dreadnought was 600 meters long and followed a standard design. It cost 7.2 million credits, so it was very cheap in production, cost and maintenance. It was primarily good at acting as a support ship for bigger ships, as well as hauling some pretty significant amounts of cargo from A to B. The big kind of bulb under the ship was mainly used as one big cargo hold. The ship itself could carry 9,000 metric tons of cargo and was actually pretty compact. However, while all this was well and good, the Dreadnought did have one massive flaw. Nothing, and I repeat, nothing in the Dreadnought was automated. Like, everything was driven and operated manually. The ship required over 16,000 people to operate, which caused massive problems for both local governments, the Republic fleet, the judicial forces, and more. This ship was the single most labor-intensive ship of all ships that was in the Republic service and pretty much of all time in the galaxy that was less than 1,000 meters or 1 kilometer in length. This while the purchasing and production price was low, the operational costs were sky high. The standard version of the Dreadnought could be operated by a skeletal crew of 9,000 people. Later versions included the 200 dreadnoughts of the Katana fleet. These dreadnoughts of the Katana fleet had been slave-rigged into getting more automated systems that reduced the crew requirement to a meager 2,200. This carried with it the weakness that there was one mother ship that had control of the rest. We've actually seen the same principle in Star Wars Episode 1 on Naboo, where the Trade Federation ship blows up that controls all the B-1 battle droids on the ground, whom afterwards went numb. The Dreadnought lastly carried consumables for 1 year on average and 3,000 passengers, mainly in the form of troops. So, when it actually comes to it, I think it's pretty easy to see who wins the category of general things and aspects. In this case, the Munificent class is the undisputed winner. It cannot be argued against, it cannot be denied. The Munificent, while more expensive in purchasing costs, more than makes up for that for being much less labor intensive than the Dreadnought. 200 crew members compared to over 16,000? That added to the many times more cargo carrying capacity and ability to carry troops into battle gives the Munificent class the undisputed victory here. Now let's look at the ships in terms of their speed and maneuvering. The Munificent class had a pretty standard setup with its speed and maneuvering abilities, able to go with 2,300 G per maximum acceleration, and since it isn't specified, I'd estimate 900 to 1,000 km per hour in atmosphere. It managed to reach the speed via its Class 1 hyperdrive and Class 10 backup. Added to that, the weight of a fully loaded Munificent class, I'd argue that the total weight of it is pretty heavy, and while I know that there is per se no weight in space, there's still this thing that takes so and so much power in order to propel something forward. And while it takes a certain amount of power to propel something heavy forwards, especially for something fully loaded, remember also that the frigate is very wide, and so, especially in an atmospheric scenario, it is very wind resistant. So it will inevitably slow it down significantly, and this ship isn't exactly very aerodynamic. Now, the Dreadnought is set to have a Class 2.0 hyperdrive and a Class 18 for backup. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if the backup hyperdrive could even make the jump to light speed. However, with that said, the Class 2 is still pretty relevant. If I had to make a guess based on my current knowledge of the Star Wars universe, I would estimate that it could reach about the same speeds as the Munificent, being about 2,300 Gs per maximum acceleration. However, I have a feeling that, though in atmosphere, this ship would be pretty slow. And while no specifics are made of the speed and maneuvering capabilities, I feel that the Dreadnought will only be able to reach 800 to 900 km an hour in atmosphere. Now, I could be wrong about this, so take it with a grain of salt. I do think, though, that the Dreadnought is pretty maneuverable in comparison to the Munificent class, because it's a bit smaller and narrower, and is slightly more aerodynamic in a way, especially in the atmosphere. And so I have a feeling that it would have an easier time turning around. Now for this one, it's more difficult finding a winner. While the Munificent class is bigger, it also has much better specifications, like a Class 1 hyperdrive is vastly superior to a Class 2. However, this also depends on how the engines are optimized, is it for speed or cargo hauling. And here, I think that both ships are a bit of a mix of both. I will, however, grant the victory in this category to the Munificent class frigate, because it actually has the better listed specs, and unlike the Dreadnought actually have some listed specs. Munificent class wins the category of speed and maneuvering. Now on to the offensive and defensive capabilities. Now, the Munificent class frigate was very well armed, especially for a ship its size. It makes the armament on a Venator look like child's play, however it only gets better. The Munificent class frigate had two prow-mounted heavy turbolaser cannons, each one capable of firing a blast that could completely destroy a 1 kilometer diameter moon. That for the Star Wars universe is pretty darn powerful. But of course, knowing the Star Wars universe, we don't stop there. Oh no. It had two equally as powerful long-range ion cannons, 26 twin turbolasers, 20 light turbolaser cannons, 58-point defense cannons, and 8 flak cannons, plus a hyperwave jammer. Phew, that was a long one. All these weapons, however, did cause the vast majority of the power generated to go to its weapons, so that it had only very little power left to keep up the shields, as well as the Munificent class being fairly lightly armored. Therefore, the Munificent class were normally used in packs of 3 or so, and as escort ships. While they could definitely dish out the punishment, they had a harder time taking it back to the chin. That is not to say that the Munificent frigate was a bad ship, it's actually really good, but it does have its Achilles heels. The armor on these things was actually so thin or light, in fact, that without shields, it could be penetrated by the firepower of ground vehicles in the form of the All-Terrain Tactical Enforcer, or ATTE. And I'm not just talking about the roof-mounted mass driver cannon, but also the regular firepower from the ball-mounted turrets. That's pretty serious, I might add, and it does speak volumes about how vulnerable this frigate actually is. Now, for the size of the Dreadnought, it was likewise heavily armed. However, unlike the Munificent class frigate, it was very heavily armored. It was armed with 20 quad turbo laser cannons, 6 fore, 7 port, and 7 starboard, 10 turbo laser cannons, 5 starboard, 5 port, and finally 10 turbo laser batteries, 5 fore and 5 aft. So, in a sense, this ship was covered in weapons all around it. You could not outflank it or sneak around it, hitting it where it couldn't hit you back. A standard weapons modification of the Dreadnought was to add a warhead launcher, enabling it to fire a standard load of 25 concussion missiles, and while it's not a lot, it's worth mentioning. It also did have ion cannons, although specific numbers are unknown. I would estimate around 15 to 20 ion cannons, split evenly around the ship's 4 sides. Whether these ion cannons were heavy, light, twin, or anything, though, is also unknown. I've given a number that I would estimate, so don't hang me up on it. That's sometimes one of the problems about doing these kind of versus videos, because there's often the problem that you have to make an either educated guess or you have to simply just make a guess, depending on your knowledge of the ships in the Star Wars universe. So I do what I can to read up on these things, but there are things that elude me, and yeah, that's how it is. So that's why I'm saying don't hang me up on it. I'm making some estimations here. Apart from that, the Dreadnought also carried a single shuttle, and during the service under the Empire, it had space for 12 TIE fighters, in other words, a full squadron. Under the Katana fleet, the Dreadnoughts also carried some ATPTs, all-terrain personal transports. Look at them as a beefed-up ATRT, or a smaller version of an ATST. So for these two, I now, unlike earlier, have a much harder time deciding which ship should be given the edge. The Munificent class does have more weapons emplacements, however the Dreadnoughts have quads, who on their own are also very powerful. But what really takes the cake here is the fact that the armor capabilities and shielding is where the Munificent class really falls short. It simply does not have the same strength in the hull, as the Dreadnought was actually reported to have rammed directly into a Imperial II class Star Destroyer. And while the Dreadnought took massive damage, the Star Destroyer was broken in two. The Munificent took a hit from an asteroid on the front armored hull bumper that protected its cargo hold. When that Munificent class was hit by that asteroid, one of the droids said that didn't sound good, along with some massive rumbling that came from the ship itself. Notice that this was also while the shields were up and directed in the front. So, on that front, I think it is safe to say that in the category of armor alone, the Dreadnought gets the edge. However, in weapons, I would have to be inclined to give the edge to the Munificent. The reason for that is because of its oversized guns in the bow. A few shots from them could even put a Venator out of its misery, with the Venator shields being fully powered up, as we saw during that same battle where the Munificent bumped into the asteroids. The Munificent class, unlike the Dreadnought, can be outflanked, so again that does present a challenge. So the final conclusion is, even though I don't do this very often, the Munificent class arguably has the better weapons, but the Dreadnought has the better armor and possibly even shield. So I'll have to call these two equals, because one is much better on the defense, the other one's much better on the offense. So finally, for the verdict and closing thoughts. Now, this one will not be easy, and in all seriousness, it's just about impossible for me to pick a winner because of these two. So, therefore, we'll be setting up two different scenarios, because the winner of a battle between these two really depends on how you go about steering them. So, if the Munificent class frigate is supposed to win this, it will have to attack with its two massive prow-mounted cannons up ahead, and then sweep in above the Dreadnought and fire the vast majority of the rest of its weapons. In that regard, the Dreadnought will stand little to no chance. So in that scenario, the Munificent gets the point. The Dreadnought, on the other hand, can have a chance at winning this if it can manage to stay out of the firing arc of the prow-mounted oversized guns. However, even then, its chances could be better. The best thing the Dreadnought can hope to do is remain behind the Munificent class and then fire at the flanks. But if the Munificent class gets above it and actually manages to fire its smaller weapons, even the smaller weapons will make the Dreadnought struggle quite a bit. The Munificent, however, will not be able to outflank the Dreadnought because the Dreadnought has weaponry that is so diverse and spread out. All of its angles are covered. That presents both strengths and weaknesses in the fact that it can never bring its full armament to bear at one time. The Dreadnought, however, does have its quad lasers, yes, but they are too thinly spread out on all the angles to leave any huge impact. Like the rest of its weapons, it's a strong ship all around, but that in itself carry a strong weakness also. So, in the conclusion of the verdict and closing thoughts, I think that while the Dreadnought can put up a serious fight because of its much stronger armor and arguably stronger shields over that of the Munificent class, there are still too many odds stacked against it, and frankly, even a strong ship like the Dreadnought won't be able to go on forever. The Munificent is too much for the Dreadnought to handle even with the power that it has and the strong armor, plus all the other categories where the Munificent class either won or got equal with the Dreadnought. This is, however, one of those battles where a lot of Star Wars mods do play a role in putting the Dreadnought slightly above what I personally think is reasonable. A single Dreadnought cannot take down an Imperial 2-class Star Destroyer, because it took 6 Dreadnoughts to take down one Imperial 1-class Star Destroyer. So, don't forget that the Munificent class could, in like 3 shots with its prow-mounted guns, take down a fully armored and shielded Venator. When putting that into perspective, I do think that the Dreadnought will definitely hurt the Munificent and take its shields down, doing some massive damage, but it will not be enough before the Munificent has broken through the Dreadnought. So, with all that said, I'd like to declare the Munificent class frigate the winner. Now, of course, remember that this is only how I see the match due to how I would rank the ships based on the research that I've been able to find, plus adding some Star Wars mods into the equation as well. However, still taking their showings with a grain of salt due to them having to be fairly balanced in many respects. Now, I do hope that you all enjoyed this video, and I would like to wish you all a good day, night, evening, morning, wherever you are in this galaxy. But before you go, once again, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button, as well as the bell button to become part of the Zerka Legion. Now, General Sarkobi will sign off, and may the Force be with you. Always.